Hi, my name is Joe Cartwright. Welcome to my studio. My aim with these videos is to help you paint better watercolors. And remember, if you like what you see, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll be informed of each new video I produce. Also, if you have any questions or requests, please leave them in the comment section below. I read them all. Enjoy your painting. I've done the drawing. There's at least an hour's worth of drawing for those of you that haven't been to Venice. This church here is called Santa Maria della Salute, and it's a very famous, one of the iconic buildings of Venice. And this is a photo I took about 12 years ago when I was over there. While it's in Venice, it really is a painting about shadows and reflections. What I've been doing of late, what I discovered, if I wet the back of the paper, and I wet it quite significantly, and you'll see how much I wet it, it slows down the drying time of the painting and gives me a lot more time to paint. And that was great because, and what it showed me was that the real reason the surface of your paper dries, the main reason actually, is the fact the paper absorbs all the moisture, and then it leaves only a small amount of moisture on the top, which then evaporates. So by wetting the back, it really slowed that down to the point where I would use my spray bottle, 4 or 5, 6 times in a painting, virtually every painting. Now I might do a dozen paintings without having to pick up the spray bottle. I still use a spray bottle sometimes, but it's so much less frequent, and it gives me so much more time to paint, especially when I'm doing any dramatic skies and things like that, where you've got a lot of subtle shapes you want to put in while the area you're working in stays wet. However, like with all things watercolor, there's no, they're more guidelines rather than rules, and you have to understand when to use them. For instance, if I go out painting outdoors, I wouldn't wet the back of the paper because it would just take too long for it to dry. Especially if you're painting very early in the morning in winter when the temperature might be 3 degrees, well, you just can't. Your big problem then is how to make it dry quicker, right? So it's not something you do all the time. And in this case, there's really 2 main steps. There's getting the underpainting done, where I do the sky and the water and the highlights of the buildings. That's done in one go, and that's actually quite quick. Then when I get to do the detail of the buildings, I have to do that after the underpainting's totally dry. So if I wet the back thoroughly, what'll happen is then I have to dry it, and it takes quite a while to dry even with a hairdryer. So what I'm going to do for this one is I will wet the back just enough to stick the paper to the board. Then I'll quickly do the underpainting. Then I'll dry that so that the paper's bone dry. Then I'll re-wet the back, and you'll see how I do that. Okay. So let's just start. And what I'll do first is I'll just give this some water. The other thing with wetting the back is it's the equivalent of stretching the paper. In the old days, when you stick your paper in a bathtub for 15 minutes, that allows it to expand, and then you would tape it using that old gum tape to a board. You'd leave it overnight, and in the morning you'd have a dead flat surface to work on, which didn't cockle very much when you were painting. This does pretty much the same thing. Okay, so while that's just absorbing some of that moisture, I'll put some water in my palette. My basic technique when I'm painting is I work out how much water I need, or how much paint I need for a particular passage, and I put that amount of water in my palette, and then I mix that. That way I don't have to keep going and adding more water. I also tend to over mix the amount of paint so that I don't run out and have to try and remix a particular colour. So in this case, we've got three main passages. We've got the sky, and I've got two colours for the sky, and then we've got the water. So for the sky, and it's an early morning scene, so I'm just going to get some cobalt blue. And it's quite a weak mix, very sloshy. If I pick up some of this paint, drag the brush through the edge, and then just drag it onto a test piece of paper, you can see how weak that is. That's probably a bit too weak for what I want. So I'm just going to add a little bit more paint. And that's good enough. And then here, I'm just going to use some very weak cad orange. All my colours are Winsor & Newton, and that's important because there's so much variety between different brands, and some oranges are much redder than this, in which case it wouldn't work in this painting. Winsor & Newton cad orange is a very yellowish orange. It's more like a yellow with just a hint of red in it. But that colour's good. And then for the water, I'm going to start with some turquoise, cobalt turquoise, and then some French Alps marine. It's a blue-grey colour with hints of green in it, so and then I'll add a bit of burnt sienna, and that will grey it off. Needs to be a bit stronger than that. Generally what I do, I work to get the colour right, and then I work to get the tone right. So the first mixture might be quite weak, but with the correct colour. And then once I've got the colour that I'm happy with, I'll go in and add more paint, and that'll thicken the paint up, and that's how you increase its tone or its relative darkness. Stronger in tone up here, so there we go. Just quick brush strokes. I'll pick up a loaded brush with the cad orange just to get that transition started. Then I'll clean my brush, pick up more cad orange and start coming down paper with that. Now this wall has a lot of light on it. I'm going to grab a bit more cad orange and just add some of that here. And right through. And I'm going to add just a hint of permanent rose as I get lower towards the horizon. Sometimes you get a warmer section. And I'll run this down to effectively to the water's edge. This is in shadow, so this area would be cooler. So I'll just drop some of those cool colours there. There we go. Great, and now, so that's the sky done. Now I'll pick up some of this colour that I'm going to use for the water. Drag the brush through the edge here to take out about half the moisture. Dip it in some clean water. I've got a gondola back there, I'm going to leave a little highlight on that. And now I'll go into the thicker paint, or undiluted paint. Now the other thing I wanted to do is to preserve some of the whites here, some of the sparkle like I've got happening here, and just going to press against that, hopefully lift enough moisture, which I should be able to do. I might get a smaller brush too. Better. And I'll get a size 12 brush. Quick brush strokes and you leave all the sparkle. You can always go back in and use some gouache to add a little bit more of these highlights, but I try to avoid it where I can. I'm just adding a little bit of pattern to it, that'll do. Then what I'm going to do, I want some thicker paint. Drag some of that over here, add some more paint, but no more water. And we're going to use that to add some little undulations. Bigger shapes closer and they get smaller as they move into the distance. I'll connect some. Right, now some of these buildings have red roofs on them, so I'm going to mix a little puddle of permanent rose, a bit of scarlet lake, a bit of burnt sienna, and I want it a bit duller than that, so I'll add a tiny bit of French ultramarine. Oops, tiny gem, bucket load. Now this is all being done wet on wet, which means I'm not going to get a sharp edge. It's going to be I'm purposely letting some of the colours flow up and around. It just adds a bit of atmosphere. There. 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 That doesn't matter, that'll do. And then here. And already I can see this is drying very fast. Yeah. Great. Okay, so that's that stage done. I want to put a darker wash on this section here. Oh, just some raw sienna. Great. There we go. So I'm going to re-wet it now because I want this to be nice and flat while I'm painting the buildings. And I'll wet the board. Okay, so that's quite wet, but the top layer is dry, so I can run my hand across it without dragging any paint around. So now all I'm going to do, I'm going to work on the buildings, start from this side and work my way across. I'll mix a puddle of the shadow colour I'm going to use. So just some French ultramarine. A little bit of a permanent rose. And some burnt sienna just to grey it off a bit. It's pretty good. Maybe just a bit more paint. Great, that'll do it. All right, and I want to make sure I preserve a lot of these highlights. And then so effectively I'm going to start by painting the shadow in, and then while the shadow's wet, drop in some other marks. I'm going to mix a little puddle here, don't need a lot of it, of just French ultramarine and burnt sienna, and that'll make up the darker, almost black mark. And this has to be quite a bit thicker in consistency. And that'll do. By pre-mixing them, it just gives me a lot of time when I'm painting, and I'm not having to keep trying to mix and match colours. And I drag this bead of paint down the paper as I go. In fact, leave a little highlight on this awning. We've got these barber poles here. I'll paint around them. You still have to paint quickly because things will dry, and I've got the air conditioning running here. And I keep coming back to the areas that I've wet to make sure the edge doesn't dry up and leave me with a hard edge, or I didn't want a hard edge. I'm going to dilute this a bit, pick some of this paint up, drag it over here, add a bit of water to it. Leave that there for a minute. Just lighten it a bit. I want to go in with a smaller brush, this size 8. And just sort of the two reds and a bit of burnt sienna, a bit of the shadow colour. That'll do. Just dropping in some of these hints of the windows. There, it's quite dark underneath the awning. Later I can come in and add just a bit more detail here. There we go. That'll do. And we'll come back to that. Let's keep working over here. And all I'm really trying to do is capture the feel for the place, not worrying too much about the details. Yeah. And we get a bit of this red, and drop it into this building here, just because that's the one that has some red on it. Saving a little highlight on these two gondolas that we have here. Good. Painting a little bit faster than I would probably normally do if I'm just doing it on my own. It's the nature of demonstrations. It's that. Put a little mark on that boat for later. There we go. They're a bit too dark, so I'll just lift some colour. That's better. I'm always keeping an eye out how wet the paper is, how wet my brush is, how wet the paint is. That'll do. This is too wet, I'll have to come back to that. So let me move on to this section. Back here there's an island in the distance. Just put that in now. I'll come back and add some more detail here once this dries a bit. This one roof, put that in. While this is drying, I'll start on this dome. And I drag that bead of paint down the paper and use it to paint with. Some statues. And some chimneys. This dome has a highlight on this side, so I'll just clean my brush, lift a highlight there, and I'll get some raw umber and just dribble that into this shadow, because it's a light, the dome's a different colour to the side there. This is the old customs house, just in the part of it. Go back and work on these domes. Now, I need to get rid of some of this moisture here, or it'll just flow back up. So I'm just hinting at some of these shadow shapes. Now I'm going to come back here and just lift some of this in the distance. Just to add some depth to that part of the painting. And I'll add a little bit of these, my reddish colours, permanent rose, scarlet lake and some burnt sienna, in with some of this shadow colour. In some sort of Hessian while they're renovating. And quite often what I'll do is I'll put a mark like that and leave it there for a bit. Then I'll go in and paint some other area. Then I'll come back and paint over it or through it. But because it's been sitting there for a while, it's like it stains the paper, like and leaves you hints. So where you look at in this photo, you'll see areas that they're dark. You can tell there's some sort of shadow there, but it's somewhat indistinct. And and that's how I achieve that effect, basically. Other times I'll leave a little gap just to separate, because all of this is wet, so if I paint too close to this, it will flow down. So I'll leave little gaps here and there just to separate some of the colour. What the hell? That'll do. need to go back in here, lift another little highlight. These highlights aren't that difficult to retrieve later anyway after it dries, so I don't want to overdo it. Alright, now we'll get some light grey. I'll just get some raw umber. Add a bit of blue to it. And some cerulean. Yeah, I'll get rid of that green. There we go. Yeah. There's just a little highlight there. Okay, that's fine. Leave you there. Now I'll just step back and have a look at it. This is probably dry enough that I can put in some of these darks back here. Very little moisture in my brush, otherwise I'll get a cauliflower just with a paint. It's still wet. That'll do. When that's dry, I'll put a little shadow on one side. So I'm just establishing a few more sharper edges. A little bit of turquoise for some of these. And again, I'm not worrying too much. I'm really more looking at tones, just how light or dark a shape should be, more so than colour. That'll do. Let's put these people in the front here. Usually for flesh tones I just use just a sort of a warm grey, something like raw umber and a bit of scarlet lake. Cadmium red if you've got it. Just a pale grey for the hull. Drop in a bit more of a shadow at the front. Later I'll go and darken that screen once this dries a little bit. Figure up here somewhere. Just going to throw in some other figures just to that'll do. Here, put a whole bunch of these bollards. Just to break up that edge. Good. I'll just mix the colours I'm going to use for the reflections. Just primarily some cobalt turquoise, maybe a little bit of French ultramarine, a bit of burnt sienna just to grey it off a bit. Maybe a little bit more. Let's get a bit of extra water for this section here just to make it a bit lighter in tone. And we'll go a bit stronger. And all I'm interested, getting the reflections roughly in the right place, but also they do move a little bit with the ripples. I'm also interested in creating an interesting pattern. It's good, and then there'd be a reflection of this dark section. That's just French ultramarine and burnt sienna, that dark that I had. So I'll drop some of that in. And then there's that strong, really dark shadow underneath this little deck. Dark line underneath the boat where it connects to the water. I'll get a smaller brush for that. And then the hints of reflections of the figures if they're standing around. I have to make sure my paint's reasonably thick when I do this. Otherwise it'll just disperse everywhere. Now, these bollards have a little shadow on them, the shadow side. And then I'll clean my brush, take out about half the moisture, and then come in from the dry side and just run the brush over them. And when you're doing reflections, the basic rules of reflection are reflections of a dark object, like a black object, would be lighter. Reflections of a light object are darker, like a white boat would have a darker reflection. And directly below the object. Obviously, if there's ripples in the water, you'll get some sort of motion. Just something like that. add a bit more of a reflection of that. And then here, where we've got the lit side of that building, I might just lift a little bit of colour. I get just a bit of dirty raw sienna, which is sort of raw sienna with a bit of whatever colours on my brush. And we're just dropping in hints of these colours, of this lighter colour. There we go. Will do. It's okay, that one's fine. And then a weaker mixture of this reflection colour. I'll just pick some of it up and dip it in water. And I'm going to throw some of that in there. And then just hints of these other dark shapes. And then on this side, just hinting of reflections. These objects in the distance, you can hardly see their reflection just because of the angle. I might exaggerate it just a bit. And usually at the water's edge you'll see a dark line. And that helps connect the boat to the water. Again, a weaker mix in the distance. Go back to a bigger brush. And I like, these darker reflections back here, so I'll bring them back in from over here. Making sure that they're connected and also that they're not too regular. And miraculously, if there's a little dab where I accidentally dabbed some other colour before or stuck my finger in the wrong place, there'll be a reflection there. That's good. And that's good. Do a little bit of a fix-it. I went in here with those bollards when it was still a bit damp. Serves me right for rushing. It's easy to fix. Good. Just darken this front part of the boat. Yeah. And I'll go in and paint its reflection. Reflection of the point will be somewhere here, so I'll just put that in. It doesn't have to be totally exact, but and I'll try and make it a bit squiggly to imitate the wave motion. Now I'm going to get some French ultramarine, burnt sienna. Again, I don't bother cleaning my brush for something like this because I'm really creating a dark grey colour. And run that at the water's edge. Like that, clean my brush, take out about half the water and then come back in from this side and just soften that edge, and that's what will connect the boat to the water. Just some dry brush strokes, just quick marks, just so that the shoreline isn't a dead straight line. There we go. Now these are closer, so I'm going to just make sure that their shapes are a bit more defined than down here. But again, not as defined as over this side. I'll do. And maybe a few pigeons, and there are definitely a lot of pigeons in Venice. And that's about it, folks.